battle-scarred royal warship slams into our quiet station bay. Its queen steps out wrapped in living metal that no longer listens, and her patience is thinner than air. When she demands to know who repaired her sacred armor, one human engineer raises his hand, and the galaxy holds its breath. If you are new to the channel, please subscribe and like the video. Tell us where you are watching from in the comments. Now let's jump into the story. In the dim hum of Luminis 4, the air always smelled faintly of ozone and warm metal. Morgan Hale crouched beside a stubborn pressure valve, fingers steady, mind elsewhere. He had once pictured himself designing clean engines for long-range exploration. Instead, he tuned the guts of a tired station that circled a sleepy gas giant. Even so, he took pride in the quiet click that meant something dangerous would stay safe for another day. "Hale!" Foreman Bruck called from the catwalk above, his voice like gravel sliding from a bucket. "Drop what you're doing. Bay 9 just lit up with a priority dock. Security wants engineering on standby." Before Morgan could answer, a deeper alarm rolled through the deck. 2 notes, not the usual 3. Everyone knew that tone was reserved for the unexpected. He grabbed his thin toolkit and jogged, boots kissing the metal with soft knocks. Bay 9 held a ship that did not belong in a refueling loop. Its lines were sharp and austere, like a blade made of night. Scorch marks traced its flanks. Selith markings shimmered, then settled. The perimeter bristled with Confederation guards, led by Captain Irid, tall and focused, eyes like polished steel. The airlock hissed. 3 figures stepped out, armor moving as if it breathed. At their center, taller by a head, stood Queen Nalira. Her suit was etched with patterns that flowed like writing and ocean currents layered together. A thin cape of liquid sheen trailed, catching the bay lights in soft ripples. "Who leads this platform?" she asked through a clear translator. It was not a question that waited. Captain Irid inclined his head. "I do. We can mobilize repair crews." "Name the system." "My ship will mend," the Queen said. "It is my armor that must rise first. The alloy is aerolith. It no longer reads my thoughts." Irid's composure flickered. No one on Luminis 4 had ever been asked to tend a monarch's suit. He looked over the assembled workers. Most stared at the floor. Morgan felt a small tug in his chest, the old curiosity that had not died despite years of valves and ducts. "I can look," he said. Only then realized he had stepped forward. One of the Selith guards tilted their head, as if measuring the distance between possibility and risk. Queen Nalira lifted her hand. "Come." They led Morgan through corridors that softened around corners and seemed to adjust to the Queen's stride. Her chamber smelled like low-tide rain. On a platform sat plates of the suit, some intact, others warped, dimming, their surface quiet. Morgan asked permission with his eyes. She gave a small nod. The first plate was light yet heavy in meaning. The texture shifted subtly under his fingertips, like skin that remembered scar and forgot it at once. He ran a microscan, but the results wavered. He frowned. "It's trying to heal," he said, "but there's a constant signal blocking the lattice from closing, almost like static in a nerve." The Queen's posture eased a fraction. "Our tools did not show that. Your approach is different." "Sometimes the simplest view sees a crooked beam," Morgan said. He breathed in, then asked for a phase anchor no one had requisitioned in years, and a micro-etch array older than the station's floors. Foreman Bruck grumbled by comm but sent the gear. Morgan calibrated by feel and logic, drawing a map in his head as if the plate were a city with roads that wanted to connect. As he worked, the bay's alarm changed tone. Short bursts now, whispering that the marauders who had scarred the ship might still be prowling the rim. Time shrank. Queen Nalira watched in intense silence. When the tool hummed at the right pitch, Morgan traced the failing channels and laid down a steadying path, like a thread across a tear. The plate warmed. Faint lines brightened. Aerolith flexed with a sigh too soft to be sound. The Queen reached out, brushed the surface with 2 fingers, and closed her eyes. A small light pulsed beneath the metal, then steadied. "Acceptable," she said, and for a Selith ruler, that was a sunrise. She lifted a thin coin from a compartment at her wrist and placed it in Morgan's palm. It felt cool, then gently warm, like a promise thinking itself through. "For identification," she said, "and for the next door you may need. Captain Irid's comm snapped loud. Unknown vessels at the perimeter. Station on alert. Queen Nalira gathered the plates with practiced care. We depart within the hour, she told Morgan. Your hands held more than tools today. She left with her guard, and Morgan stood a moment longer, the coin humming once against his skin. Outside, the station's lights dimmed to amber. Somewhere between stars and metal, a decision waited, patient as gravity. Foreman Bruck met Morgan at the lift with a look that meant trouble had opinions. You touched a queen's shell, he muttered, low enough to be almost kind. Either you just secured our future or bought us a pile of headaches. Maybe both, Morgan said, trying to smile and failing. The coin, no thicker than 2 fingernails, rested in his chest pocket, warm and steady. It made him feel like he was carrying a key to a door he could not yet see. He returned to the Seleth chamber with the phase anchor balanced like a violinist's instrument. The 2 guards let him pass. Queen Nalira had set the plates in a frame that held them as though they hovered. Morgan called up a schematic on his wrist pad and then ignored it, choosing the slower, truer way. Eyes, hands, breath. Speak your plan, the Queen said. The lattice reweave, Morgan answered. Aerolith behaves like living mesh. Your suit routes thought along microchannels. The hit it took fused a few paths and confused the rest. I can unfuse and guide the flow with a gentle etch, then hold it in place with phase balance until it remembers itself. You make it sound like tending a garden. Metal is only dirt that learned to stand, Morgan said, and surprised himself into a grin. The Queen's mouth almost mirrored the shape. He began. The micro-etch array drew lines thinner than breath, clearing the blocked lanes. The phase anchor hummed like a lullaby at the edge of hearing, keeping everything from slipping back into confusion. Whenever he felt unsure, he paused, not to think but to listen, the way one listens for a distant train in old stories. The armor answered in temperature and tone. Time fell into a rhythm. Trace, hum, wait. Trace, hum, wait. The guards did not move. The station's alarms changed textures beyond the walls, sometimes near, sometimes far, like weather in the next valley. Morgan did not look up. After hours that felt like minutes inside a single careful breath, he stepped back. Try now, he said softly. Queen Nalira placed her palm on the central piece. The plate brightened along filigree lines. The light moved like ink in clear water, resolving into a soft glow. Then, as if relieved, one repaired plate called to another and another, until the frame hummed in quiet agreement. Satisfactory, the Queen said, but her eyes said more. The summit awaits. We must go, she turned to prepare. Morgan cleared the equipment, stacking each tool as if it mattered where it slept. He reached the hatch when the world broke into a voice that did not belong to their air. Luminous 4. The broadcast rasped across every corridor, every room. This is the Grey Syndicate. Surrender the human who interfaced with Seleth alloy. Do so in 7 minutes and your station returns to calm. Captain Irid's response came tight and even. That is not a negotiation we recognize. The broadcast chuckled without humor and clicked off. Morgan's fingers found the coin in his pocket and pressed it like a heartbeat check. The Queen stepped back into the chamber with her guards. You will leave by a maintenance route, she said. This station is not built for sieges. They want me, not the station, Morgan said. They want what you now carry, she corrected. The seal in your pocket is not only a sign of favor, it contains partial frames of Aerolith's older principles. The Syndicate would twist them. Morgan stared at the coin. You trusted me with this without telling me? Trust, she said, arrives before language finds a way to name it. A beat of silence passed as the alarms tilted toward urgent. Morgan nodded once. I need to send a tight beam to your ship. They're jamming most channels, but the level 7 array can punch through if I align it by hand. You will not have time, said one guard for the first time, voice quiet and fluid. I'll make some, Morgan replied. He looked to the Queen. May I borrow your faith once more? She held his gaze, then inclined her head. Borrow nothing. Take what you need. She placed 2 fingers to the coin through his pocket. It pulsed, faint but sure. And keep that close, Morgan ran. The lift stuttered. He used the stairs. The corridors wore red light now, gentle but insistent. He slipped into a service passage that smelled of cold metal and old paste. Footsteps and orders echoed in the distance. When he reached the comm hub, a lockout blinked at him. Command level only. He rested his forehead against the panel, breathing steady. He could backtrack, search for Captain Irid, try to cross a firefight, or he could think smaller. He pried a floor plate loose, reached into the tangle of cables with a tech's careful reverence, and built a path that bent the rules without breaking them. It took 2 minutes he could not spare, and 3 he did not have. When the array accepted the bypass, it still refused the send. Jammers chewed the signal with bored teeth. "Fine," Morgan whispered. "Then we go outside." He grabbed a vac suit from the emergency locker, clipped a tether to the hull ring, and cycled the air. Stars greeted him like old friends seen once in a dream. The gas giant below wore bands of amber and tea. Beyond the curve of the station, thin points of motion traced the syndicate craft. Morgan pulled the coin from his pocket and, remembering the Queen's touch, pressed the center. Soft plates unfolded like a tiny flower, revealing lines that hoarded light. He held it to open space. Nothing happened for a moment long enough to be doubt. Then a wave, clear and soundless, rippled outward. His suit trembled with the data the wave carried. "Please," he said to no one and to the distance. "Please hear me." The response came not in trumpets, but in a shift of shadow. Space wrinkled, then unwrinkled, and a Selith cruiser announced itself without announcing anything at all. The gray syndicate craft pivoted, sensing new math. The cruiser drew a clean arc between the raiders and the station, calm as a lighthouse that expected storms and did not complain about them. Morgan's suit pinged. "Engineer Hale," Queen Nalira's voice carried through the comm with a control that comforted. "You've activated the beacon. Hold position." "Gladly," Morgan answered, boots hugging the hull as if it were a cliff over a night sea. The skirmish was swift, not because it lacked danger, but because it lacked theater. Precise lines of light, a brief dance of countermeasures, and the syndicate withdrew with the assurance of people who would try again later. The cruiser did not chase. It simply stayed where it needed to be until the quiet felt trustworthy again. "A shuttle is on its way," the Queen said. "You cannot remain on Luminous 4 while carrying what you carry." Morgan looked toward the small lights of the living decks, where people held mugs too tightly and told each other bad jokes to keep fear small. "What about them? Your presence here is a magnet they do not deserve," she replied. "We will speak with Station Command. We will not leave them uncovered." The shuttle drew near, opened its collar, and took Morgan in with a gentleness that felt like courtesy. Inside, a Selith attendant helped him shed the suit, then offered a warm cloth that smelled faintly of citrus and metal rain. Morgan's hands shook for the first time since he'd stepped outside. The attendant pretended not to see. The corridor to the Queen's chamber had changed. Lighting brighter, pace quicker. Queen Nalira stood without helmet, eyes the color of deep water at night, hair like threads that moved as if they heard more than sound. "The seal," she said. Morgan placed it on her palm. "You told me only part of what it is," he said. "Because only part was safe to know at once," she answered, not unkindly. "The frames it holds are not weapons. They are bridges. Old Selith understanding of living alloys, simplified and translated. I intended to carry them to the summit as a promise." "An open door. The Syndicate would rather sell doors than walk through them." Morgan's mouth quirked. "Some markets never change, and some hands open them anyway," she said. "We leave now for Centaura Prime. I would have you there as technical witness. I'm a maintenance engineer," he said out of habit more than humility. "You are a maintenance engineer who heard a metal's breath," the Queen replied. "That is not common." Morgan thought of Luminous 4, of Foreman Bruck's bark and the silent satisfaction of a valve that finally behaved. He thought of the quiet pride in making things safer for people who never learned his name. Then he thought of the way the armor had sighed when it remembered itself, and how the station had shivered when danger came close. "All right," he said. "I'll witness." The jump to Centaura Prime gathered space like fabric and smoothed it out again. Through the viewport, the planet looked like a jeweled garden, cities braided in light. The Grand Convocation Hall rose from the heart of the capital like a shell grown to fit a public storm, in a waiting room too elegant for his scuffed boots. Morgan met President Orvin, whose voice carried warmth the way some people carry umbrellas, always within reach. Chief Scientist Itra offered a nod that balanced curiosity and caution. "We hear you saw the inside of Aerolith," she said. I saw what it wanted to be, Morgan answered. Her eyes brightened. They entered the chamber. Tiers of delegates curved like waves around a calm center. Queen Nalira did not take the assigned seat at the rim. She walked to the speaking dais without the armor's cape because presence is sometimes better shown without fabric. Representatives, she said, translator gentle. We came as observers. We now request a more honest place. She held out the small seal. This device contains foundations of our living alloy craft. We offer these as a beginning, not an end. A murmur rippled, not disapproval, not yet belief. President Orvin lifted a hand, inviting clarity instead of clamor. Our commissions would need scientific confirmation, he said. Not for lack of trust, but for health of process. Then ask the one who has already listened, Queen Nalira said, and stepped aside. Morgan felt every gaze, but he did not feel small. Aerolith doesn't just hold shape, he said, voice even. It carries intent. Imagine a bridge that senses where weight falls and thickens itself under your step. Imagine a medical sleeve that learns a person's movement and responds like a good friend. The frames in that seal are not full instructions. They're seeds. With careful soil, they can grow in our systems without cracking what we already know. Chief Scientist Itra asked 4 precise questions. Morgan answered with simple analogies and short truths. By the end, 3 different delegates were already drafting the same proposal. Because sometimes agreement is a crowd arriving from different streets at the same door. President Orvin smiled in a way that said he knew when a tide had turned. Then we create a joint commission, he said. And we ask this engineer to serve as translator between metal and mind. Queen Nalira looked at Morgan with a rare softness. He nodded. He did not feel like he had climbed a mountain. He felt like he had found a trail people would enjoy walking together. Months move the way ships do when you stop staring at the clocks. Steady, faster than it seems. The joint lab sat on a low hill outside the capital, wide windows catching morning light. Morgan split his days between clean rooms and meeting tables, between test benches and laughter over bitter coffee. Chief Scientist Itra argued beautifully. Then she tested twice as much as she argued. Selith artisans carved microchannels like calligraphers with infinite patience. The first breakthroughs were not flashy. A safety harness that stiffened before an impact, a work glove that steadied a tremor, a ship panel that redirected heat to where cold hands needed it more. Nothing screamed miracle, and yet everything whispered kinder. Foreman Bruck visited once wearing a new jacket that made him look slightly uncomfortable and proud. He stood by a window with Morgan, watching a prototype drone practice gentle landings. Never thought I'd see you in a place like this, Bruck said. Me neither, Morgan admitted, smiling. Turns out machines behave the same everywhere. They like to be understood. People too, Bruck said, gruff as always, but warmer at the edges. He squeezed Morgan's shoulder with a hand that had lifted more than its share of heavy things. One late afternoon, Queen Nalira appeared in the lab in lighter armor that seemed to breathe along with her. In her hands was a cuff of dark metal veined with pale lines. For you, she said. Morgan held it. It was cool, then not. When he clasped it to his wrist, it adjusted with the gentleness of a cat settling in a lap. A tide of information brushed his mind. Not words, more like context knitting itself together. He understood a little more of Sealith's tone, a little more of how Aerolith preferred to turn, where pressure should be concerned and where it could relax. This is too much, he said. It is exactly enough, she replied, and it grows only as you invite it. They led him to a quiet room where a human-fit worksuit stood on a frame. Unlike her battle gear, this design suggested care over war. Slim manipulators for delicate tasks. A sensor array tuned for repair over fighting. The team surrounded him. Scientists, techs, artisans. Half smiling, half holding breath. Morgan stepped into the suit. The connection was not a jolt. It was a soft hand taking his, asking if he wanted to walk. He did. Displays curved into being. Lines of energy arranging themselves like sheet music waiting for a song. He reached toward a far table. The suit extended fine tools as if they were fingers he had always owned. He adjusted a filament across a sliver of test aerolith, watching the lattice align as smoothly as two friends finding the same pace. How does it feel? Chief Scientist Itra asked. Like my thoughts have a quieter path to travel, Morgan said. And like the tools have been waiting for me to say hello. Queen Nalira nodded. That is the point. That evening, the lab hosted a small ceremony to open the first wing dedicated to shared exploration. President Orvin spoke briefly about patient change and swift courage. No one mentioned the Grey Syndicate by name, but everyone remembered the lesson. Building together is the best way to discourage those who only take. As the gathering thinned, Morgan stepped onto a balcony. The city's lights lay below like careful script. He could still feel the suit even though he had left it in the lab, the way you can still feel a boat's sway long after you return to shore. Quiet footsteps approached. Queen Nalira joined him, leaning against the railing with that precise posture that suggested ease and readiness at once. "Considering your next valve to fix?" she asked, amused. "Considering the next door to open," he said. "We started with armor. We ended with bridges. And I think we're only at the trailhead. The outer maps are thin," she said. "We will need people who listen to metals and to neighbors." Morgan thought of Luminous 4's hallways, of the gas giant's calm storms, of the moment in Bay 9 when his mouth said yes before fear could learn it had a job. He looked up. The night above Centaura Prime did not shout. It invited. Inside, a question was asked. Who would lead the first joint mission beyond the familiar border? To learn without taking, to mend before making. Morgan did not make a speech. He did not step onto a stage. He simply lifted his hand from the balcony rail as though greeting a friend across a wide street. The room behind him quieted. The Queen's gaze softened. President Orvin smiled. A few scientists exchanged looks that already contained plans. And in that small motion, hand raised, palm open, everyone heard the answer they needed. Long ago, in a noisy dock, an armored ruler had asked who would dare repair what mattered to her. A human engineer had answered. Now at the edge of a calmer night, that same engineer greeted the larger dark with the same gentle certainty. The stars, patient as ever, lifted their own lights in return.